So welcome to the second part of paraphrasing, because the first part we talked about the skills of using shell nouns and nominalisation to help writing our text more concisely. And this week we are going to talk a little bit more about other paraphrasing strategies. And here are the objectives of the week. In that we're going to analyze more strategies and having me show you more tips for paraphrasing. And we'll also look at how we change the sentence and grammar of original text when paraphrasing. And the focus of this week will be how we are going to combine two sentences into one through the process of condensing. And by condensing, of course, we're going to recall some of our knowledges that we have learned in the previous 2 weeks, which are the use of shell nouns as well as nominalisation. So this is the main part of this tutorial, in that we are going to make logical relations into verbs. By logical relations, as we are going to explain in a minute, which will mainly be the logical connectors that we use in English, that means conjunctions. And through verbalizing, so we work the other way around, right? Last week we talked about nominalizing verbs into nouns, but this week we're going to talk about how we are turning some other grammatical parts into verbs so that you can connect the two phrases causally. So remember, causally is different from casually. The spellings is quite similar, but they are not the same. So I learned this acronym recently, FANBOYS, as I visited a colleague's class when she taught her students conjunctions for connecting sentences. So if you take the first letter of each conjunctions, for example, you have for, F, and, A, nor, N, but, B, and then we have or, O, and yet, and we have Y, and then so we have S. All these letters will form an acronym called FANBOYS. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how we are going to paraphrase sentences with conjunctions linking sentences. I'm sure you are familiar with this conjunction. When we want to talk about reasons, causes, we can use the conjunction for. Of course, you may also say that for is a preposition. But in this case, when we are linking two clauses with for functions as a conjunction, as with the conjunctions of because, or those that include since or as. For example, we have the sample sentence saying that because the sex of males and females is suggested to be different, colloquial use of gender has evolved into associating the biological division with the cultural division. So we can use because at the beginning of a sentence, but remember you have to connect this sentence with another. Okay, so aside from using because, you can use because of or due to. And in this case, if you use because of, the sentence that originally follows because has to be nominalized, or you have to turn everything into a noun phrase. And then you can paraphrase the next sentence as an effect. Or if you want to go to the extreme, you may want to paraphrase the conjunction because into a verb, okay, as result from or is caused by, and then what comes what comes next to effect, the main verb will be effect and reasons both in the noun forms. Okay, that means you have to either nominalize the sentences, or you want to link two ideas in noun forms with the verb result from or is caused by. The other extreme would be you turn the conjunction into a noun. For all we know, the conjunction for means reasons, cause, or factors. And these nouns that I've just mentioned are nouns that can be used to paraphrase because. So you can say because of, and then you have to use a noun phrase. And then you are linking this noun phrase about cause with the linking verb is, the verb to be. And then you finish the sentence with reason. And in the next slide, I'm going to show you an example of the paraphrase of the original sentence as you see in this slide. Now, you can see the first sentence pattern has been demonstrated for you. So we have due to the suggested differences between the sex of females and females. And basically, you may want to repeat the main sentence. But of course, as an effective paraphrase, you can't simply copy and paste the original sentence into your writing. So you have to do something else. But here is an example of how you are going to change the clause with because. So the adjective different has been nominalized into differences, and then you will have to change the other parts of speech, like suggested in this in the original sentence was a verb is suggested to be different, and in this case you turn the verb suggested into an adjective. Okay, by adjective it does not mean that the word suggested is an adjective, but in terms of its function in the noun phrase, the suggested differences between the sex of males and females, the position of the word suggested functions as the adjective for differences. Okay, so you can compact your writing in this way. And then you may see I haven't done the second and the third pattern for you. This means in the class you will have to show me your examples, how you're gonna paraphrase the above sentence into in your own words. The second conjunction, and, is very commonly used when you link two points as a way to add new points or new ideas. So that means when you say adding, you may want to use the nominal form or the noun form addition. And you now know what I'm going to use for paraphrasing sentences linked by and. That would be in addition or in addition to. When we use in addition, it will be rather straightforward. We only have to break the original sentence into two separate sentences, and the first clause will stand as a single sentence, and then you separate it from the second one with a full stop, and between the two clauses you add in addition. But then this is strictly speaking not paraphrasing. You also need to paraphrase clause 1 and clause 2 in some other ways. But a better way to paraphrase the sentence would be using in addition to, so that the original sentence following and will have to be paraphrased into a noun phrase. Okay, so in the next slide, I'll show you an example of turning this original sentence, which is complexity theory and related concepts can be used in research that relies on computer simulations and can also be used to evaluate the behavioral development of living organisms. Okay, so let's take a look at the next slide. I've actually gone to another extreme, which would be starting the sentence with the gerund adding to. Okay, so my example would be adding to the usage of complexity theory and related concepts in research that relies on computer simulations is used for evaluating the behavioral development of living organisms. If you look at my example, use as a verb would be paraphrased into its noun form, usage or use. Okay, with the change of the verb into a noun, everything else has to change correspondingly. For example, the subjects, complexity theory and related concepts will have to become a part of the noun phrase usage of complexity theory and related concepts in research, and so on and so forth. And then in the next clause can be also be used to evaluate and so on. You can see the paraphrased sentence would be its use for evaluating the behavioral development of living organisms. Okay, so I can't explain all the processes to you here because you've already got some ideas about nominalisation in the previous weeks. All I am going to emphasize is how you are going to paraphrase conjunctions. And in this case, I turn the conjunction into a gerund, adding to. Okay, so this is strategy number 2. The third conjunction, but. Okay, so here we have an example also from some expert source. Here it is. The findings of Scott and Panksepp, whatever he or she is called, showed a high frequency of physical play among males, but our results showed a higher frequency of physically interactive group play among females. Okay, so we can see the conjunction but. Of course, we can paraphrase but with connectors such as however. And just like in addition, if you use however to paraphrase the original sentence, you have to be careful because you can't simply break a sentence into two and connect them with however and see that as a paraphrase. You still have to paraphrase the separate clauses. So I would introduce another phrase for you, which would be despite. And remember, when you use despite, it's very different from using although, because when you use although, you can simply write a clause after although. But in this case, when you use despite, you have to turn a clause into a noun phrase. Okay, so it works just like in spite of. So remember, despite is not followed by the preposition of. But if you want to use of, you may want to use in spite of. Okay, so you also use a noun phrase after in spite of, and then you may want to paraphrase the clause as well. So I added an example of paraphrasing with instead of. And you can see at the bottom, our results refute that females engage in physically interactive group play more frequently instead of males, as shown in Scott and Panksepp's study. And you can see when you use instead of, I basically totally changed the first clause. The findings of Scott and Panksepp showed a higher frequency because the first sentence has already written something in a similar structure, saying that our results revealed that females engage in physically interactive group play more frequently, which means the previous findings from another study show that it's actually males who are highly active during the physical group play, but the new results, okay, will show something else. So I use instead of in this case, and you can also see that both sentences have been changed significantly, such as I use revealed to replace show, and in the original sentence when we use a noun phrase after showed, I use that clause, expanding the idea a little bit. But by expanding the meaning, I'm not saying I'm adding anything new, but it's simply that I make the sentence more lively in terms of putting back the verb engage, meaning that females are being more physically active during interactive group play in this sense. So in the activity, you are going to try paraphrasing the sentence using despite. Let's see how you do it. And just like because, you can also paraphrase so. So in this case would mean result, okay, and consequence. So you may want to use the verb cause to link cause and effect in this case. So for example, it seems to be an experiment in the laboratory saying that a rodent lacks estradiol influx early in life. So whatever it means, okay, so it simply means some kind of a mouse has something missing in their body, okay, maybe some chemicals. And then in the second sentence, so it is more prone to be aggressive towards pups. Pups means the younger mice, younger rodents. So in this case, you may want to paraphrase the conjunction so with the verb result in, or you may want to use causes. But then, if you want to paraphrase the conjunction into a verb, you will have to consider turning the two sentences next to the conjunction into nouns. And I leave the verb form to you, how you're going to paraphrase this sentence with results in. But I'm going to show you my version by nominalizing the verb result, by putting result in the noun group before the linking verb is. So I wrote something like this. The result of the rodent's lack in estradiol influx early in life is its higher tendency of aggressiveness towards pups. So you can see I have considerably paraphrased the two clauses as I link the two ideas with the verb to be. For example, prone, if you check the dictionary, it would mean tendency. Okay, so more prone would be higher frequency, and aggressive, in this case, would be turned into the noun form aggressiveness, and then you can finish the sentence with towards pups. Okay, so I'll leave the verb form result in to you in the activity. So let's see how you do it. aside from fanboys, the conjunctions, you may also want to consider different, or I mean, other functions of a sentence. When some sentences show purposes, just like what I told you about the differences between so and so that. Okay, so we have purpose. It is important to cite original sources in order to demonstrate integrity. Or we may also use sentences to show possibility of something. For example, we use modal verbs may. Facebook use may be associated with a lower self-esteem. Or just like modal verbs may or might, we may also use semi-modals to show necessity, needs. Okay, so we use either the modal verb need or the semi-modal need to. For example, the government will need to consider many factors if the scheme is extended to cover more provinces. And of course, aside from talking about possibility and necessity, we also talk about obligations with modal verbs such as must or should. Okay, for example, a person must be aged 65 or over. When you see these sentences and when you have to paraphrase them, you may want to think about other ways to talk about these relations, as I will show you some examples in the next slide. For purpose, with so that or in order to, yes, of course you can use for the purpose of something, and then you want to paraphrase the clause into a noun phrase in this case. For possibility, of course you can put possibility back to the sentence, saying there is a possibility of something, or there is a possibility that, and then you finish the sentence with a clause. And for the modal verb need, you can say necessary, and necessary is an adjective. Or if you want to use necessity, you can say there is a necessity. Okay, for obligation with modal verbs such as must or should, you can say it is an obligation or it is a requirement. Or if you want to use an adjective, you can say it is imperative. Imperative, I-M-P-E-R-A-T-I-V-E, imperative. Okay, so do the exercise and see how you can paraphrase the previous sentences into the new sentences in your own words. After talking about the skills, I think it's also good to talk about the mentality or the mindset for paraphrasing sentences. So in this section, we'll talk about the do's and don'ts, or what you do or what not to do when you paraphrase. Of my emphases in the class so far, when you are paraphrasing sentences, the most important thing that you should bear in mind is to change the structure. Okay, if you allow me to read out the point for you, once the sentence structure is rearranged, the paraphrase is more or less successful. I won't say it's absolutely successful, because in terms of word choice in the paraphrase, you still have to pay close attention whether the words that you have chosen for paraphrasing the original sentence would be similar to the original sentence without sacrificing the meaning of the original sentence. And then as you consider changing the sentence structure, you already have the awareness about changing the grammar of particular words in the original sentence. So again, in this point, you will want to pay attention to how one change in parts of speech of a word will cause other parts of a sentence to change. Okay, so this means you have to be careful when using synonyms. because their meanings and collocations can be subtly different. That means, although some words may have the same or similar meaning to the original word, but sometimes their collocations may be different, how it accompanies other words in a sentence. So in this case, I can't give you too much detail about collocations in this presentation or in this slide in particular. But if you are going to do some internet search, for example, you may want to use something like a collocation dictionary to look at how a keyword is used with other words. But of course, if you can go to the corpus tools that I have given you, you can also see how the keywords are used alongside other words in the sentence. Or we can see the keyword in context. Okay? And I also want to emphasize a point about paraphrasing and quotation at this point, because in some cases you cannot paraphrase what some people has said. For example, definitions. When we want to keep the accurate definitions from the original source, or the original source is authoritative, for example, Sigmund Freud's words, you won't want to paraphrase his words if he was trying to define what psychoanalysis is. Psychoanalysis is. So you will want to quote authoritative definitions. And in the coming weeks, when we talk about the points of citations and how we are going to do citations in the text, we'll talk about how you should quote in your text. And aside from that, you may also want to keep the original comments by authors. If you find it is best to keep the original wording from these sources. But of course, there are limitations when you quote the text into your own essays. So, for example, word limits and how it's going to be incorporated into your sentence and so on. So we'll focus more on that in the coming classes. If you want me to summarize everything that I've just said in the previous lessons so far about paraphrasing, this would be the quote I want you to remember. This is effective paraphrasing requires changes in sentence and grammatical structures. And many cases that I have witnessed so far with some of the students having the problem of paraphrasing or direct copying would be that they don't have enough time to do the assignment. Okay, I have given you 13 weeks to work on your final essay. As I have emphasized earlier on, you are going to start reading and taking notes as soon as you can, so that you can work with the original text and see how you can turn them into your own words. So otherwise, you would risk writing hastily or in a rush during the last few days before the deadline, and your mindset would go like, and your head, the message in your head would be like, okay, look for some quotes from a text and simply copy into my own essay, and Erik won't find out. No, Erik always finds out. So remember this. Okay, do paraphrase the text from the original sources. This is a warning. And to wrap up the presentation or the tutorial, I would want to say a few words about Google Translate. Personally, I have nothing against the tool as long as it helps you with some basic ideas of how you're going to express some key ideas or some key phrases. But as we think in Chinese most of the time, as most of our students in my class speak Chinese or Cantonese, you would have to remember that you think in your mother tongue in a complex way. So that means your language used in your mother tongue would naturally be complex. But I'm sorry, Google Translate cannot deal with complex sentences in your mother tongue when it translates some ideas from your mother tongue. That means it cannot translate technical terms pretty well or nominalisation very well. And in some cases, it may result in what is commonly called tortured phrases. So they are phrases that are perfectly grammatical, but make no sense to the readers, especially for the readers who have been in your field, like social sciences, psychology, for some time. Maybe he or she would understand some of the phrases that you use in your writing, but we would understand that that is not the typical way of expressing things in English. So they will find torturing reading your text. So it's dangerous. I'll show you a couple of examples. So here is a Chinese example. If you allow me to read it in Cantonese, it would be like 咁等於容許男人入女廁啦. So if you translate it through Google Translate, you will read something like this. This is equivalent to allowing men to enter the women's toilet. Okay, not bad. But you can simply use a research verb to express what you would want to suggest, we want to say. You can say this suggests men are allowed to enter the female bathroom, or this implies men are allowed to enter the female bathroom. Okay, remember, linking verbs are always considered to be weak verbs, although it's very useful in academic writing, but it will never be as accurate or as powerful as the research verbs, sometimes of the Latinate origin. Okay, suggest, indicate, show, demonstrate, and so on and so forth. These verbs that I have taught you at the very beginning of the course. So this is one problem of Google Translation. The second problem will be the translation of technical terms. At times, Google Translate cannot recognize technical terms. For example, in class 1, when I introduced gender-neutral toilets to you, I'm sure many of you will find the Chinese equivalent as you Google it. So the Google result would be 中性廁所, 中性洗手間. But when it is back translated into English, you will see cases like neutral toilet. But this has nothing to do with gender neutral toilets, right? And another problem would be Google Translate cannot understand how you are going to put the phrase into your sentence. For example, when you say 設立中性廁所對少數人士會有得益. Okay? And in this case, you will have to use a gerund to represent 設立. So instead of set up, you will have to say setting up a gender-neutral toilet is beneficial to some minorities. Instead of saying set up a neutral toilet is beneficial. So this is problem number 2. So that's all from me. And in week 6, we'll talk about how we are going to reverse engineer some nominalization back into sentences. And I am used to calling it unpacking. Okay, and the techniques and skills for unpacking nominalization would also be a very useful skill for you to read very dense text, especially when you are reading journal articles or when you are referring to some ideas from your textbooks. And I'll also spend some time working on quotations, what you should do with the quotes from the sources and whatnot. Okay, so thanks so much for your time, and I will see you in the class. Take care.